I'm thinking director. Yep, that's what I want to do.
How much does a producer make?
Did you go to school? What did you study?
What's the best part about your job?
How do I get in?
Who do I need to know?
Welcome to 101, a podcast for young women interested in careers in film and TV.
We'll sit down with industry professionals, ask them your questions, and get the answers you need to know.
101. It's a beginning.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to 101. It's a beginning. We are here with Melanie Ragone. Did I pronounce that correctly?
You got it.
She works within the camera department as a grip. Can you sort of describe to us what your job is like?
Well, the responsibilities of a grip in a nutshell are camera support and lighting. And that entails everything that has the camera moving, rigging, placed anywhere that the DP wants it. And those particular grips are called dolly grips, but all the grips in the department assist in that process as far as the camera rigging part goes, or placement. And then they're also responsible for lighting. So any light on set that isn't a practical light, a studio light, is either color, diffused, cut to the mood or feel that the DP wants for the shot. It typically also is a catch-all department for everything from construction to, again, rigging. But they kind of are the MacGyvers on set. That's what grips kind of are referred to as.
Oh my God, I love that.
And I stole that from somebody, so I did not make that up.
Those of you who are young who don't know who MacGyver is.
Yeah, don't watch the new show. It's the old one.
I just want to shout out to Melanie about all the different projects that she's been on. Can you kind of just list out some crazy projects that you've been on that I'm sure our listeners would want to hear about?
Let's see. I mean, I guess the biggest show that I ever got on for me, that was a goal, was The Walking Dead. My daughter likes to brag about that. I really honestly don't usually talk about the shows I've worked on. I don't know, but I obviously am here to talk about the shows I've worked on. So I did Captain America, Hunger Games, Black Panther 2. That was the last feature that I just worked, was Black Panther 2 when I went back to Georgia last year.
I see The Boys.
Oh yeah, as Techno Crane. Yeah, I was doing some Techno Crane work here in LA.
How would you define your role? Can you walk us through a day as a grip?
Sure. There's different responsibilities through the kind of, do you want to know the hierarchy?
Yeah, that would be great if we can have a breakdown. Yeah.
Yeah, the hierarchy in the grip department is, we report to the director of photography, DP. We get our, basically the lighting plan from the DP, and then the key grip and the gaffer. The gaffer is head of the electrical department, but the key grip, it then goes key grip, best boy, dolly grips, and thirds. And dolly grips, again, they are responsible for when they are assigned to their camera. They're basically tethered to it at all times. And they're responsible for that camera the entire run of the show. And then the thirds also help the dolly grips, but they do mostly the lighting on set or any other thing that's assigned to them by the best boy or the key grip. And the best boy on set, which is something that I have done over the past 7-8 years, is you're basically responsible for every last single stick of gear that comes on set, from Techno Crane down to sandbags to C-stands. I mean, every single thing you see on set is their responsibility. They're responsible for, you have to be really good with logistics, coordinating items with different departments. And you work as the best boy, and you deal with production, you deal with all the administrative, all the paperwork, all of the BS that nobody wants to deal with. And it's extremely stressful. So it does require, you don't really see them on set a lot either. And that was hard for me when I bested, was I like being on set. And so to be away from set, it's you know what's going on, but it's your responsibility to kind of be at the truck and make sure that everything is taken care of so your key grip doesn't have to worry about anything. And that's kind of your job as the best boy. But I'm talking about in the union world, for the most part, though, that is the structure. That is not true on smaller sets, on non-union sets, and but it is kind of universal even throughout the world, that hierarchy, because film crews, obviously, they come from the States and then they hire crew in other areas. But That is kind of the standard. Just depends on how many you get. Is, the bigger the budget, the more the people. The best boy role is something that kind of like, and I have worked with really bad best boys, but typically it's somebody who's organized and, can handle a lot of stress and take on all of those responsibilities for the day. Typically, the responsibilities for a third are whether you're on location or at stage, regardless, the truck gets unloaded, carts get pushed to set. You kind of confer with your key grip and find out what they want there. So I've worked with some key grips who are very like, let's not take out anything until it's called. And then I've worked with key grips who are, let's dump the entire truck. And you're like, why? But it is what it is. You might be helping the dolly grip lay track. You might be helping, set up flags, carrying sandbags, carrying stands. There's typically like, within like the thirds, as we call them. So you're basically just like, maybe there's 4 of you on set, maybe there's 3, again, depending on the size of the budget. The greener grips tend to have more of a responsibility of kind of like, you're there to assist the other grips who are more experienced at lighting. Because you can't, I don't care if you went to school for lighting, you can't walk onto a film set and know how to light. It just doesn't work that way. But when you can work on crews where everyone's experienced, and that's awesome. Like that's like when you work on bigger shows, your responsibilities can range. I mean, you could be working, you can get folded in sometimes with the rigging department. You might get sent off on a second unit. That's happened to me before, where you're working on first unit and then they're like, hey, because they have their, and again, this is on union features and television, you have your core crew, and then you have day players, and your core crew is like usually like of 3 or 4 people. And then those people are the ones that are there through the entire show. And then you have day players who come in, and like, that's what I used to do too. When I first got started, was day playing. It's a good thing. It's a good way to network. But your responsibilities as a day player are, again, different day players do different things. I always tried to just like, be there for the crew that was already on, who I knew had been working the whole run of the show, or, like on big shows like Captain America, that happened, where you're working on first unit as a day player and they're like, hey, go prep a truck. You're working second unit now. So then you become a regular crew on second unit. So, but yeah, it's responsibilities, I think, throughout the day for grips are my biggest thing with my guys that I wanted to see them doing was being busy. If there's not anything happening on set, and maybe you don't know your knots, maybe you don't know how to light, maybe the gear is dirty, maybe it's just like kind of. But again, that's I never wanted to be a best boy because I knew what was entailed in all of it, and then I kind of got pushed into it and I was offered a job and then I took it. But it is a lot of responsibility above when you're a third.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to backtrack a little bit, just for you personally. When did you know that this was the industry that you wanted to be a part of?
When I was a kid. Like, I'm literally one of those people where I'm like, this was my dream, not to necessarily be a grip, because that's not what I wanted to do. I didn't even really know what that job was. I didn't even know that it existed in the film industry. And I mean, I could remember seeing it on credits, but I never really knew what they did. But yeah, I remember as a kid just being like, I think probably too, at some point in my life, I thought I wanted to be an actress. I did theater when I was a kid, but I'm totally behind the camera person. I'm just not like, I'm not performing for anybody anymore. I mean, that's kind of where I'm at. But yeah, that was definitely something totally when I was a kid. I could remember like, I'm going to work in movies one day. I had no clue what I was going to do, but yeah.
Here you are.
I know, right? Here I am. Yeah.
Did you go to film school, or what did you study? Like, can you sort of walk us through your education?
Yeah. So in high school, I've always been artistic. And I wish that when I was in high school that there had been more things like online like there is now, and that's available to like when my kids went to school. But yeah, I did photography in high school. I did pottery, all the artistic classes that I could take, I took. And then since I got pregnant with my daughter and had her at 19, that kind of, I always had a dream of being on Saturday Night Live. Like that kind of on camera thing I can do. I know it seems weird, but it's more like theater. It's theater. And that derailed that, obviously. And then I started going to the Art Institute in Phoenix when I lived in Arizona. And then that got delayed. And then when I moved to Atlanta in 2008, I then started attending the Art Institute of Atlanta. And that's where I went for digital filmmaking and media production. So, and it did me absolutely no good in the film industry.
Yeah. No.
Not saying.
Yeah.
Can you tell us more about that? Because I think that, I think that just to kind of put it like a silver lining on it, like there are a lot of young women who may not have gone to film school, or they know that they want to be in this, but they're like, oh, well, that means I have to go back to school. And I'm not saying that there isn't value to going to film school, but, can you talk a little bit more about that for our listeners?
Yeah, I feel that if you want to go to college and that's something you always wanted to do, then you should go to college. If you have parents who will pay for you to go to college. I did it all on my own. I did not have any sort of financial assistance from my parents. But I feel like if you want to go and do it, that's awesome. And people would argue this fact too, but I'm not saying that it might not give you a little bit more advantage, and simply because of the people that you meet when you're in college. But if you want to be a filmmaker, depending on whether you want to go into lighting or you want to direct or produce, or it doesn't really matter. Everybody should start as a PA. That's my personal belief. But I don't say that there's not value in going, to film school. It's not a necessary thing you have to have. If you're going because you think that's going to get you into the film industry, then you're going for the wrong reason. But it is it's a good springboard. I learned more about writing and structure than, and editing. That was another thing too, because I'm completely self-taught with graphic design. And I actually was a graphic designer previous to my film life. And that software, those classes were valuable there. But again, I taught myself after I got in there, but yeah, it's not a necessary thing, I feel like.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, it can sort of help you like to map out where you want to be in the industry, but it is sort of what you make of it. But that's with anything, any job that you have, so. I
know. And I'm trying to I'm talking with the Academy right now. I did a panel last year with the Academy Awards, and it was just about and they have an education department within the Academy. And I mean, I know that there's other people talking about it, but I feel like you hear people talk about what the director does, and we know what the producer does. We know what the executive producers do, or I should say most people know, but you don't ever see like a lot of like what the crew does. Like, what's the crew doing? Like how do you guys, you really don't. I would love to expose more of that, but and then too though, but that brings out ugly things too about the film industry. So
yeah, I feel like we've all either experienced it or heard about it for sure.
Or been traumatized by it, right? Yeah, when you almost there's nothing like almost dying on set to have you like reevaluate, like, what am I doing here? And it shouldn't be that way though. Like anybody who is on first unit, who is working a highly physical, dangerous job, and it's dangerous for everybody. I mean, but it's even more dangerous for those departments, and it's just something that. And then of course, you're working these long hours, and I got off track. I don't even know what we were talking about. So.
No, I think it's okay because I'd like to keep hearing more about this, because what would you say is the most difficult part of your job?
I think like the hardest part about working in the film industry is, I mean, everybody probably agrees the hours really suck. And unless you're like a doctor or a fireman or, somebody working in those types of fields, like people just don't even understand when you don't work in the film industry, like when you're on a show, like what hours you're working, the run of the show, how long it is. And it literally consumes your entire life. Like it's a extremely pressure driven environment. And the bigger the show, the more the pressure. And especially if you're in these like really dangerous jobs, like such as grip or electric or rigging or camera stunts, like I don't want to leave anybody out. I'm not saying that other departments aren't working, but you know what departments I'm talking about where it's highly dangerous. And that I think is something that like, it doesn't really matter if like, you don't go into set thinking like, oh, this is a dangerous environment. I mean, it's kind of already something once you start working in the environment that you know of, and not saying that you get lax about it, but you kind of, because it is a cool environment. It's a creative environment. It's a fun environment. It's changing all the time. But again, the whole safety thing and remembering that you are on basically like a construction site. And that like I do really think though the most difficult thing just in filmmaking overall is the hours and the toll it's going to take on your personal time. That you start out all wide-eyed and starred and you're like, oh, I'm working in the film industry, and I'm not saying it isn't cool, but it's like keep track because time's going to pass really quickly on you. I mean, if you're single and you don't have kids, hey, that's great. Granted, I did have kids, but I was primarily single most of the time, and I really found it as like the film industry is kind of like my family, like I really do like working with people like that. I think one of the most difficult things in gripping is just, and this is with electric too, grip and electric this is hard on, is not only are you, it's very physically and mentally, it tolls on you. But it's definitely, I think, the breakdown of the body, because the physicality of it is so, I mean, like I have injuries that I'll never recover from. I know there's a lot of grips who have a lot of injuries that you don't recover from, or it just like takes a toll on your mental health. You don't even really kind of realize it. I think when I got here to LA, I really didn't realize it until I had stepped away from not working on shows for a while. And I was like, holy shit. Like, I didn't realize, I refer to this in my book as being in it. Like, you don't even realize that you're in it. And you're kind of in this, just like this cycle of just, that's why when someone refers to like something and like, oh, that happens in all industries. No, it doesn't. The film industry is extremely unique, and there's no other business like it. And anybody that works in the film industry agrees with this statement, because it is such a, and I love it. It's a love-hate thing, but I feel like it is such a, if you let it, it's a soul-sapping industry. But again, you can get to the point in your career where you can work with the right people. You just have to be kind of conscious. I'm sorry, that's like the dark side of the
No, I think it's really important. And I think it's like, it's so easy for us all, because I think we all do that. Like, this is so cool. It's like so great to be creative and make stuff. And this is a reality of what we do. It obviously is varying degrees in different departments, but I think it's so important, especially the difference between like above the line, below the line, and knowing the difference between the way people are treated and the lifestyles.
Yeah, no, totally. That's, I mean, and I will produce eventually, but I would love to write the book then above the line, because there is definitely a drastic difference in how crew is treated and when you're below the line. I could be totally wrong when I say this, but in my experience with most producers has not been negative. It's just been that they don't have the information or the experience. Maybe I really feel it's important that if you want to get into the industry, that you're like, oh, I want to be a director. Oh, good for you. Do you even know how a film set works? Like there is a hierarchy, and it's like super important to know. Like, I would like anybody who's working for me to have started in a position where they were like low man on the totem pole, because then you know what it's like to be on crew. And I'm not saying that, I've worked with fantastic producers too, who come in and who care about the crew and who order extra gear, give us the money. We're not trying to we're telling, this is a safety issue. We need more of this, or we need more people, or whatever. Those people are definitely the ones I've worked with more than the latter. But those ones that are there, like you were talking about before, where things things are being done the same way that they were always done. It's just like, God damn, like, this is why I want someone to let me produce. Let me give you a fresh perspective coming from somebody who literally came from the bottom. Like, I started as a PA. I have literally watched how set works over the last 12 years.
I guess, like, how do we fix this?
Set is like, we're not going into an office and like working on a laptop all day. It's like you're like exposed to like sounds, gunfire, explosions, yelling, screaming, fire. There's all kinds of these elements. That's why I have become even more desensitized than I already was. But it definitely has this kind of it contributes totally to that safety issue where and I don't know honestly what the solution is to that, because you can say add more days on, and I feel like it does come down there is something that's kind of broken in the system. And I'm not saying every show operates like this, but it seems to be, the bigger the show, the more the money, the more stuff they're going to add, the more things are going to change, scripts change, actor schedules change. And I know that happens, but it just seems like if that's happening and, you go to, there shouldn't be an argument about if I come to you and I'm like, hey, we need 2 extra guys on this day or whatever, or we need like this piece of gear or whatever, there shouldn't be an argument from production about that. But I do feel that those 2 things are certainly linked, where the time factor of everything, where I'm not a big fan of I'm not going to rush. There are, directors do different things. And like, I love shot lists. That's my favorite. Like, as a director would provide shot lists because I'm just so OCD. I want everybody on the same page. What's happening. Like, the DP, the director, the gaffer should just constantly be on the same page. What's everybody doing? Every single one. We can't get the shot without the camera department being there. It's like, I like to communicate everything, even maybe more than needed sometimes, but
So you mentioned the book a couple times. So we know that you've been in this industry for years, and something clicked and you started writing a book called Below the Line, right?
Mm-hmm, correct. So I always knew that I wanted to produce and direct and write, not necessarily write, like be in a writer's room, right? That's not my goal. But my goal was always to move to LA, was always to come out here and create projects. I'm very procedural, which is why I made A Good Best Boy. I like procedures. I like systems. I like structure. And yes, shit changes all the time, but I like that kind of like, here's what step 1, step 2, that it's very easy to convey that information to other people if you have like a medium for it. So I was thinking like, how can because when I got started as a woman in the grip department, I was kind of, definitely I was in the minority. When I got in, I don't know how many women are in now in Georgia. I know there's more, but when I got in 479, there wasn't a lot of females in grip and electric. There was some riggers, some electric, very, very small numbers. And so I was kind of, I don't know, like, even as, it's funny, like as tough and as strong as I come off, I'm like, it still kind of made you feel stupid sometimes to like ask somebody a question, or if you weren't sure about something, and to remember everything. I'm a note taker. Like, if someone tells me I put notes in my phone, like I can't remember, I'm not going to even try to remember it. So that's what I started doing. I started putting notes in my phone, and I was like, how can I convey this information? And I think once I kind of got my footing in the film industry and realized what not only my job responsibilities were, but like all of these happenings on set, I started keeping track, like notes, or I would email myself. And then I just kind of started fleshing out paragraphs of stuff I wanted to talk about. And it's more like I wrote it it's a practical advice. So I'm trying to make it sound like I'm talking to you about it. Like, I even got on my editor about this. It's funny. Is it like, I don't want it to sound too edited, if that makes any sense. I talk about, my experiences in the film industry, like what my job is. It's a very like literal breakdown of all of the happenings on set, down to how to read call sheets, like locations, logistics, each department, and the kind of a small explanation of what every department on set does, just a chapter that's specifically addressed to women getting in the film industry. I structured it after like that 1950s, which is before my time, the Army field guides. It's a very practical advice book. It's like about what plants to eat, what plants not to eat, and kind of like, so this is very practical advice that I give in my book. And it's funny because when I run it by people in the industry, they're like, oh, this is great because it compiles all this information that everybody really needs to know. And some of it is very basic. And when you tell somebody like, don't be late, like that's my biggest pet peeve. And that is one of my biggest pieces of advice is don't be late. It's stuff like that where it's like, oh yeah, because I didn't think about that. I have to like have, it's different on set. But yeah, it is a very, very practical advice book for sure.
It's huge. We're so excited for you, and listeners, watch out for Melanie's book, Below the Line.
And buy it. Definitely keep us posted, because it sounds like something that not only will I buy just to make sure that I know everything in the book, but what a great resource to have on set for people just starting out and saying, hey, listen, like if you have any questions, like check this out, read this, because I feel like everyone assumes that everybody knows everything. And, and that's one of the reasons that like we wanted to do this show, is because it's okay not to know stuff. It's not okay to not know stuff and then not to seek out the answers. But, it's just being okay with asking questions. So it sounds like such a tremendous resource for sure.
No, totally. And that's, I mean, education is definitely like one of my biggest, like I'm a champion of that. I mean, and I don't care, like I've had people hit me up on Instagram that I don't know, I talked to this girl, she's a grip in South Africa, and it's cool. That's like, I hate social media, but I love it for that. That it has literally hooked me up with like women all over the world who are grips and who ask me questions about the States, and it's super interesting. And like I think there's definitely like room for like content, like video content, a show for something like that, because they're like working these crazy locations. This girl's setups, like I'm looking at what she's doing on set, I'm like, holy shit, like that's some dangerous crap, but they're working with what they have.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, this is definitely like, I wanted it to be on a level where it's like, it is very basic advice, but like you said, you think that like, that everybody knows this, and you can talk to somebody for 5 minutes and know what their level of experience is in the film industry. But when you're on set and everybody's there, not everybody knows who's green, who's not, within your own crew, but that's why I wrote it. Cause I was just like, oh, if I had this information, this would have been really helpful.
Okay, so great segue into our next question. Any advice for somebody starting out who wants to get that first gig in the film industry? Like, where do they look? Who should they contact? And how should they go about that?
I know, well, and of course, stuff has changed since I got into the film industry. But there are still those gig sites. Facebook still is another, people roll their eyes at it. But Facebook actually is still a very good source of looking, like joining groups on Facebook, networking. Social media is how I networked during the pandemic. And so I definitely think social media is a good platform to look for work. And then any of those, I hate that some of these sites, they charge people looking for work. Like, I'm not going to pay your site to look for work. That should be on the employers. So I don't want that. Again, I don't want to mention any of the ones that I have used, except for Craigslist, because no one talks about Craigslist anymore. I actually found gig work and this is in Atlanta in 2008. So, but there definitely is a lot of different sites out there that you can use. Or if you went to school, you network, you can also look, work on people's small projects, like non-union work led me to union work. And it kind of just depends what you want to do, I guess. I did not have a single family member in the business. I did not have a single friend in the industry. So I literally started at ground zero. So it is possible. It's just it's a persistence thing too.
100%.
It is literally a persistence thing. I mean, and you're still even at my career level, I'm still hustling for gigs right now. I think the number one thing is networking. It's like when you get on your first gig, I don't care if it's a student project. I don't care if it's your friend down the street that you know, whatever. Or you get lucky and you get, you know, on something that's non-union, or even union, like, you know, somebody. If you know somebody in the film industry, use that person to get to other people. It literally is about who you know and about timing. You may have to work, you know, like I remember I worked graphic design while I was pursuing like just small video production gigs. And that was, I still had to hold that, you know, that job until stuff started to, you know, to come in more consistently. But
And I second the Facebook groups, because I've gotten many gigs through that. So
yeah. It's not old. It's
No.
still used. It's used by the film industry, I can tell you.
I don't. Yeah, like I
Well, I
can't
mean,
say that
what's the general age of people that are in the film industry? I mean, you got to think about that. I don't care. And my daughter, I can say this, my daughter's a millennial, and she's not your typical millennial. Oh, she's 28. That makes her a millennial, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
You are not the hot shit in town when you come on to a film set. So don't come on thinking that you're going to come in and school people who are my age or who are older than me and who have way more knowledge about the film industry and how it works and how to get into it. Within your networking circles, it's good to know the non-union and the union people, because the union people are also going to work on sets where you may want to call them up one day and be like, hey, can you help me do a car rig? Because you may not have ever had experience doing that. Maybe you've only been lighting on set. Because sometimes when you get started, you just kind of do like lighting on set, or and then as you kind of like work on bigger shows, you get to do like cool stuff, like, which I love to do, car rigs and, you know, like rigging overhead. And I mean, it's a lot, but it just kind of depends, I think, what route you want to take in the film industry, really.
A great way to kind of jump into our next question, which I know that there are a lot of different routes in this industry, which we've clearly, you know, revealed many times, but definitely this episode. Meredith and I feel so strongly about this next question. Can you just kind of map out what the pay is from when you start out to kind of like where you can go, and just give us a little more insight as far as pay?
It definitely depends on, well, first of all, where you live. The rate here for and I'm going to use grip as an example, just because that's where most of my knowledge comes from. The rate in LA for a grip is higher than the rate for a grip in Georgia. And then it also depends on the budget. So if you're like a grip, if you want to be a grip and you want to be a career grip, typically those people are going on union shows. Super general ballpark. Like you can do as well as like as 100,000 and over just as a third. It just depends how much you work too. We make our money in overtime. You know, that's the comedy of it, is that, you know, the thing that almost kills us is the thing where we make all our money. But you get into kit rental. When I was diving on set, I got dive bumps. So my rate was higher than a regular grip rate, because that is a specialty department on top of grip, is when you're underwater and doing any kind of hazard on set, you can also make more money. So you can get additional certifications so that when you're working on set, that rate, not only am I making like my daily rate, I'm also making a kit rental rate for all my gear. So they pay for my gear. And then they also give me a dive bump. So you get all of these little kind of like add-ons, which is a smart thing to do. And then if you're a key grip, of course, that's the highest rate. Like the key grip gets the highest, and then it's like best boy, dolly grips, and thirds. I'm here because I'm a native, and I'm here because I have higher aspirations. If you want to only ever work below the line, again, you can make pretty good money. But if you're trying to go for Los Angeles, oof.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, realistically, like I advise anybody that's trying to get into the industry to go somewhere else first. I mean, you know, like start in Atlanta, because it is easier to get in Atlanta. It's like that money that you're making here, obviously in Los Angeles isn't going to stretch as far as if you're living in, and there's other areas in the country. I mean, and Canada too.
Yeah. Thank you. That it's really helpful for people starting out and who need to know these things.
Do you have any favorite directors or films that have influenced you or made you want to be in this industry?
I'm a child of the 80s. And so, but I also had a kind of before my time influence of Alfred Hitchcock.
Sure.
That
Yeah.
style. I love Quentin Tarantino. Of course, there's Patty Jenkins. You know, Wes Anderson is one of my absolute favorite directors. I've seen almost all of his films because
Me too.
I just love how meticulous he is, like about every little detail. And that's kind of how I am. There were like down to, I don't know if you saw the French Dispatch recently. Yeah. And it was like, just everything was just like, oh my God, it was so good. I need to watch it again. But yeah, like
I watched it again. I watched it twice. Yeah.
oh, it's so good. It's just, I aspire to be a director like that, where you have like people who actors who want to work with you again, crew who wants to work with you again. You kind of go and you work these projects over and over again with centrally like the same crew. Steven Soderbergh is also another one that I really am a big fan of because of his lighting. It's everything about like, you know, when you watch it, it's his film. That's like the mark of a good director. The 80s was definitely a big influencer on me for sure. I want to write a coming of age screenplay, and like that Stand By Me is just, and that is the true sign of a good screenplay, of a good movie. That movie still holds up today. So does Goonies, you know?
Yeah,
like,
Goonies. Oh my God.
all the John Hughes movies, they all have a common relatable thread, that whole like teenage struggle thing, or like being, you know, odd man out, being the nerd, whatever. But like, they really like, those are the kind of movies that like, oh, I totally like relate. I was a nerd. So
Yep. I was a band geek.
yeah, I was like the dorky, like tomboy, you know, wanting to be girly girl, like super awkward. And like, yeah, like that was totally me. But
I was in the show choir, guys.
Woo!
It's funny, I've never met anyone in the industry that's like, I was the coolest kid in school.
That's why I love the film industry, because it's filled with like, we're literally like a bunch of misfits. You can be yourself in this industry.
Well, Melanie, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Everybody is going to learn a ton, and we just appreciate your candor and just telling it like it is, which I think more people in this industry need to do. You know, your experience and your knowledge and your sense of humor just added so much to this episode. So
Oh, thank you.